Good morning, everybody. Hopefully, you can hear me well. People are still joining, so let's wait a second or two before we continue. Okay, people keep on joining, but as clock is at 10 o'clock, hopefully you can all hear me well. Welcome to Power Platform Morning Coffee, and welcome everybody from Stockholm as well. Luckily, in Finland we don't have rain at the moment. Hopefully you have a moment of your time now to think about Power Platform, chill down a little bit, maybe take a coffee and think about Power Platform things with us. I'm Jasmu Hiltula. I'm head of low code in Solita. Today sharing some thoughts about competencies and Power Platform, and with me here today is Jussi Roine from North Advisors and other companies. Sharing information from what is the future of AI and Power Platform. We have some time for questions and comments in the end, and you can use this webinar software all the time to send messages and questions to us, and we come back to them in the end of the show or webinar. Let's try to be laid back and have a good moment to think about things with Power Platform. So my thing was about Power Platform and competencies and what we have experienced about that. Power Platform is relatively new platform, 5 years, or then if you think Dynamics things maybe a little bit longer, but anyhow, things tend to go forward quite fast, and competencies and experience and expertise, what is needed, is also, I think, changing, or at least it has its own nuances. But before we go further, just to share where Solita comes from. We are software development house, or have been. Nowadays we do a lot of different things regarding data, design, cloud, and so on. But today, as we are talking about development, we are, from our development unit, we are delivering a lot of stuff, low-code stuff, OutSystems, Power Platform, but also tailor-made software, this kind of traditional development, as if you may. And we are technology agnostic house. We have a lot of partners. We are partnering with Microsoft, obviously, OutSystems, and all the biggest cloud vendors and other partners as well. But it's important for us that we are helping our customers, not just selling what our vendors want us to sell. As mentioned, we are official partner of OutSystems and Microsoft Power Platform. OutSystems being, if not familiar, OutSystems being a little bit more towards agile, professional team doing a little bit more traditional development, but augmented with modern tools and so on, whereas Power Platform is hopefully more familiar for all of you. I'm happy to announce that we are working today together with the North Advisors, so that we can together combined offer this kind of leading edge expertise and delivery capability in all matters of Power Platform. No mergers, nobody has bought anybody. That just make it clear, we are doing things together with North Advisors. But then the competencies and how do you keep up with everything? Power Platform has been really fast evolving platform, and it's quite hard to keep up with everything. new features and concepts and best practices and that kind of stuff are announced in release waves, but they tend to be popping up all the time. And usually you hear about those sometimes from official sources, but usually from LinkedIn or blog posts or MVPs or your network. So it's quite challenging to be jack of all trades and generalist in very deep technical details in Power Platform. And now I have two different angles about competencies with Power Platform. First is this kind of Power Platform owner point of view. If you think you are owning Power Platform in some a company or organization, it's important to notice that it's more than just another programming language or technology. It is a platform, and it includes therefore a lot of different things when it comes to a company. And obviously, as many of you know, Power Platforms comes to companies by surprise usually. So decision to take Power Platform into use in the first step is not maybe done in a traditional decision-making way, but more like IT or somebody else notices that, hey, we have this tool in use now, we need to be able to govern it, and we need to be utilizing it at fullest, and so on and so forth. And it's important to notice that there are many different aspects of utilizing any platform in a company, and Power Platform being just one of those platforms, and it's not different in any way to other platforms, if you may. So just like one thing to share that idea that please now when you have a moment like right now, have a moment to think about how could we work in a company towards having culture or leadership or organization or trainings or whatever to get more value out of Power Platform, so that it's not just a technical feat or something like that. Then if we think of skills of experts and consultants or specialists working wherever, when mentioned that I'm Power Platform specialist, everybody thinks in the beginning that obviously that this means that here's somebody who's developing things on top of Power Platform, Power Apps, Power Automate, using Dataverse, so on and so forth. When digging a step deeper, what we need in this project and in organizations, there will be governance. Well, this is pretty well covered already. Governance has been main topic for many years already, I think. Especially from technical point of view, how do you set up DLPs? How do you set up environments? How do you set up certain kind of stuff? Training. This is also have been around a while, and it's still really important. Maybe our experience is that trainings are not so much technical, or focus of trainings have been going towards business people understanding the value of Power Platform and how to get best value of it, what it actually is, how it differs from other concepts, where it was maybe more technical app in the day type of things earlier in Power Platform's scene. Then Azure, when you're using Power Platform, you quite often end up doing things with Azure. Some Azure components are really important, like Azure Functions or buckets or blob storages, I mean, and so on. So Azure is something that is often needed. Understanding of Azure and skills of at least certain components when working with Power Platform. Then this like business value consultancy, as I mentioned, it's important to understand Power Platform value in a company so that we can, in decision-making level, already understand that what are the benefits and how should we run this kind of projects or solutions or internal development. Speaking of internal development, usually things that we are building with Power Platform are internal tools, enhancing processes, enhancing some things in the company, and we end up, or we start about talking about technology and Power Platform and so on, but we end up being the like discussions of processes, how to enhance them, and service design, and how do we get more time for our like users, for example, how can we automate things and so on and so forth. This is really important topic. Obviously, security. You need to understand Entra, security groups, Dataverse permissions, and so on and so forth. And AI, which Jussi will be talking about. So me saying here that Power Platform, from owner point of view or doer point of view, is quite vast. There are many things, and when you're listening these kind of talks here today or in a Microsoft event or wherever, it's hard to understand that what are all the things that I need to know. And there are some unicorns in the world always that knows them all. But usually they are not available then when you need them. When we come to this kind of teams ideas, I think last 20 years or 50 years, I don't know how many years, but long time, there has been this belief that most value comes out from a team that has multidisciplinary skills or so on. Now, Microsoft is starting to use word fusion team. I know it doesn't mean exactly this that I'm talking today, but idea here is that you need to have a lot of skills available for a team, and traditionally we have thought it that all skills need to be in that particular team so that they can deliver. And for example, Scrum methodology pretty much says it that a team should consist like from the people that have all the skills needed so that there are no any kind of external blockers. But when it comes to this kind of platform development or platform engineering or Power Platform, doing stuff with Power Platform, it is so that there are things that are built in projects, and usually they are used, or in project we are using Power Apps, Power Automate, Dataverse, Power Pages, Copilot Studio, whatever. And then there are connectors that we are using together with platform team sometimes. And then there are these kind of platform related things which are usually said that are part of governance, even though it's not particularly true. But me here is trying to say that as we have, or like IT in general has introduced this concept of platform engineering in general, Power Platform is one of those platforms. You need to have this kind of bottom level ideation training and then technical governance stuff available for your projects so that they can focus on the stuff that they need to deliver in a project. And all of us, Solita and all the other Power Platform users, need to figure out how we get the both skill sets available for us as we need. I want to share just for inspiration our Ramirent story a little bit. You can find the full story from Google, obviously, using Ramirent and Solita as a keyword. We had great success together with Ramirent. We created basically a tool for digital handling of their all their rental from the order to delivery, the rental process inside of Ramirent internal tool. And it was really interesting in many ways, and that was one our key learnings there. That one, or maybe we had three. One, that it starts with technology, but it goes towards processes. Two, you need to have this kind of multidisciplinary team or multiple skills. Not only, it's never only Power Platform. For example, here we needed to do stuff in Azure as well. And third, which is always, I don't know if it's a little bit new thing with Power Platform world sometimes, that if we don't calculate the dynamics, that you need to have continuous development and support and that kind of processes in place. But please go and check that reference story. I think most of you find it interesting from our website. But me being this kind of inspiration in the beginning, hopefully it is you to decide if it was inspiring or not. But I was warming you up, and now it's time to give the microphone to Jussi and listen to stories about what Jussi has to say.
Thank you, Jasmo. I trust you can all hear me well. The first sort of benchmark when you're delivering a talk is, are you able to share your screen? Jasmo, can you confirm that my screen is showing properly? I trust it's showing. Alrighty, good morning. Let's talk about Power Platform and AI. And AI obviously is all the rage. I've got some interesting takes on where are we today, how did we arrive here, and where are we going next. If we haven't met before, my name is Jussi Roine, and if you're wondering why am I holding a positive broccoli in the picture, this is my mission of trying to learn to eat more vegetables, and hopefully somebody else will be inspired as well. With Power Platform, there's been three main developments in my life that has led me here. The first one was the Commodore VIC-20 that I got in 1982. I was at the ripe age of 5. My parents had the foresight to buy me this one. I couldn't really read or write yet, but I was able to copy basic code from a magazine and put it on the screen to do some sort of programs. And then I got MS-DOS with a real PC. The rest, as they say, should be history. But there's been a more prominent development in my life as well. And that was 2 years ago. This is a screenshot from an Excel file. And when we were sort of exiting the COVID pandemic, I figured that let me build a house. I've never built anything in my life. So I figured this will be a nice exercise. Perhaps I get to utilize Power Platform as well for that one. And as part of the requirements from the county here in Helsinki, Finland, you have to measure the tightness of the soil or the ground where you're planning to build your house. And there's a single company that will do the measurements for you. I was in my summer cabin enjoying my summer holiday a couple of summers ago, and I got this in email saying, yeah, so here are the results. The purple line is the requirements. The result for the tightness of the soil or the ground is this one. And now you need to make decisions. And this stopped me. Hold on, we spend a lot of money getting the site ready, preparing everything, and now we're below the requirement. I did some frantic phone calls to different people, tried to figure out what to do. Finally, I called to the person who did the Excel file and the measurements. and told, I'm unclear what I should be doing, but this seems super costly for me. And he goes, what do you mean? You're perfectly fine. I'm like, no, it's below 2.2. Then he checks at the Excel. Oh, apologies. It's upside down. So you're way over that measurement. Carry on. This defined my life perhaps more than I care to admit. And since then, I figured whenever I'm sending out Excel files or Power Platform based solutions, I will double check that my measurements are correct. Let's spend a bit of time on productivity and generative AI. And then let's focus more on AI in Power Platform and then have a look on how to move forward from here. When generative AI became a more prominent technology a couple of years ago, when we got ChatGPT's initial version, that was in November 2022. And last year, obviously, everybody was building and trying to understand what to do with these technologies, as well as co-pilots that are based on generative AI capabilities. I spent a bit of time listing the responsibilities that I typically do on a weekly basis, meaning what would I like to do? What do I have to do? And what do I enjoy doing on top of those? And this is a subset of those, but sort of the main things here. You get customers, you have emails from multiple different Microsoft 365 tenants. You need to do breakfast and lunch and snack and dinner and supper also for the kids. You need to do yard work. You need to have 8 hours of sleep each night, all that sort of stuff. So I figured perhaps generative AI will eventually give me more productivity. And I shortlisted the things that I feel are must do, the things I really have to do regardless of the week. So family and kids stuff, sports and health, meaning eating more broccoli as well, finishing the house, because when you build a house, there's a lot of stuff you have to finish. You need some memes in your life that makes you smile at times. You need customers as well. Hopefully the customers need you as well. Everything else, well, maybe not breakfast, but everything else here is something you can postpone or move forward. So productivity at the end of the day seems to be aligned between a couple of crucial things and less on the non-important things like catching up on TV shows or writing a blog. It's fun, but do you have to do it every week? No, not really, no. So armed with this information, I went to the Eurostat website, and they have a fairly recent statistic on the use of cloud computing services in the EU economy region, comparing 2021 to 2023. So the latest is from last December. And happy to see Finland is leading the pack. This is for enterprise companies utilizing public cloud computing services, including Power Platform, including Azure, Microsoft 365, and so on. So Finland 2023 is close to 80% of enterprises utilizing this. Sweden is following us, but it's maybe going a little bit down. Not quite sure why is that. Denmark following up as well. The EU average is about 45%, so it's getting better in that sense. Norway is really pushing high. And then we have a bunch of countries where we could perhaps see more innovation, more productivity with the use of Power Platform, generative AI, and whatnot. Um, Microsoft also did earlier this year, they did a study and survey on multiple things with generative AI. And one of those findings from that survey was that generative AI is top of mind for the leadership teams at companies in terms of what sort of investments our business is planning in the next 12 months. So Gen AI is here. Automation obviously sort of couples or aligns with Gen AI. Cybersecurity is obviously a requirement, not just for Gen AI, but for everything nowadays. Then we have stuff that has been looming in the horizon, like quantum computing. I remember working a little bit with quantum computing in 2018 and 2019. trying to understand what's this all about, I couldn't really find the business case, or I couldn't really understand what it's all about. But with Gen AI, I feel everybody can immediately get some sort of benefits from that. So it's fairly evident that Gen AI is leading right now in terms of mind share and the need for investments, the need to understand how this works. But automation and cybersecurity are closely following up on that one. A Danish think tank did another super interesting study on generative AI in Nordic organizations. Happy to see that Finland was tallied up to the Nordic countries this time. So 2/3 of Nordic organizations expect to use more AI in the coming years. I think I could have told them that without doing a massive survey, but it's always nice to measure these things. But half of those organizations also expect or even require that AI will make them more competitive, probably by getting more productivity out from those spent hours and resources on projects and projects. Uh, and only a little over 1/3 expect to use AI in management work. So this is primarily for knowledge workers in this context and in all sort of work where we aim to extract more results from a limited amount of time. Perhaps less for leadership, perhaps less for management work, and more for everybody else. So before we get to Power Platform and Copilots and all the fancy capabilities we can do from here, I thought it's important to have a quick look what is generative AI. Because before we got to Gen AI, we had interesting technologies. We had the blockchain, we had IoT, we had the public cloud, all sorts of things before that as well, like virtualization about 25 years ago. And before you know it, the term AI or Gen AI is thrown around as a sort of a black box that does magic for you. So if there's a problem, you can just say, perhaps we should use Gen AI in here. And everybody nods in agreement. Yes, that's a great idea. What does it mean in practice? So if we look at behind the black box, before we get to the products and the capabilities and the productivity, first, we need data. We need a lot of data. This is not just the emails from your business. This is not just the instant messages you find. This is not just the files from a file share. As much data as we can get. Text-based, video-based, image-based, audio-based data. And typically the current models are trained on existing public data. So be it Stack Overflow, be it Reddit, be it Google, be it something else, existing news articles. We need to gather that data, we need to clean it, we need to split it, we need to sanitize it to a certain degree. And then we need to do self-supervised learning to start creating our language model. And based on what sort of a model we'd like to get out, we have hyperparameter tuning on what we expect this model to be used for. Perhaps we are hoping to get a generative AI model that can produce code for Power Platform projects. Or we are expecting to get a model that is great for customer services scenarios in Finnish and Swedish and Norwegian and Danish languages, not that much on English. So we would tune the parameters and do more learning based on that. Finally, we fine tune, we do a bit of iterations on this, and these tasks typically take weeks or months and require quite a bit of hardware investments to get this done. And as the outcome of this, we get something called the large language model, which is the heart and the brain of any Gen AI solutions, including all Copilot capabilities. HBR, the magazine, they did a study on how are businesses currently using generative AI. What is the use case in here? So this is not for Power Platform per se. This is for any sort of knowledge work, any sort of work where you have to produce something. And there's about 100 different categories that they were able to find out. I've highlighted a few from here that I typically find myself doing, maybe on a daily or weekly basis. I do specific search on existing data or from online and use GenAI for that. I try to do better decision making if I have multiple options. One would be that I get a legal text, perhaps from a partner or colleague. Hey, Jussi, can you have a look at this? I'm not a trained lawyer. What I can do, though, I can use a specific Gen AI language model, train that based on the contracts that I typically see, and start asking useful questions on that. Is there anything I should worry about this specific contract in relation and context to these 200 contracts that I've already signed? So I try to do better decisions. Perhaps it's productivity, but it's better business as well. I summarize content quite a bit. I often get emails or queries or tasks that are 20 pages long with historical data. I don't have the time or the energy to read through those. I just summarize that. But I also need to be careful on how I'm summarizing that so that I don't miss anything from here. What makes me smile a little bit is that generating code is for pros only. And I feel, especially with Power Platform, anybody can generate code. That's not the problem. The problem is understanding what you generated. Is it a proper bit of code? How do you use this? Is there any issues? And if you need to maintain that later on, you really need to understand what you generated. Otherwise, there's going to be problems down the road. So I've been preaching about Gen AI. Perhaps you can see I'm a proponent of Gen AI, but I don't see it as a black and white, that it's great or it sucks. Choose one. There's a lot of colors in between. Here's an example. I run local Gen AI models at home. I have a super small data center, and what I run in there is multiple different models, different settings, different needs, different use cases, just to learn how I can leverage this later on with customer projects. And one of the things that I did is I pulled out all the Power Platform licensing documentation from Microsoft. It's quite a bit of information. It's super complex. And I did ask the Gen AI model that could it explain this to me in simple terms. No specific question, just explain licensing for me. And this specific model came back and said, well, it's a little bit complex, but we'll give it a try. Let's see how you cope with this. And then there's 2 pages of fairly interesting stuff. But the last bit is in conclusion. In summary, if you have any Office 365 license, you likely have access to Power Platform. But it sort of is true, yes. If not, you can purchase a standalone Power Apps license, and that includes all Power Platform features. So we already know this is not the truth. This is a bit colored in the sense. And again, we come back to the settings, we come back to the different parameters we like to get and the source data. So that do we want it to be more truthful? Do we want it to be more creative or something in between? It's not black and white. So now that we understand what large language models are, what are co-pilots? So co-pilots, you could say they are interfaces for users or applications that typically ground the queries and actions with custom data. Custom data typically is something from a database, from a Microsoft 365 based data storage like SharePoint or Teams or OneDrive or something similar. And then we utilize Azure OpenAI services that run those large language models. And in order to connect that, we need something called the vector search, which could be Azure AI Search, which is on Azure, or it could be something else. And somebody needs to orchestrate this so that we know how to connect these two technologies. Looking this from the Microsoft 365 side, and this relates to Power Platform as well, we have the typical interfaces, the Microsoft 365 apps, Word, Excel, and so on. Then we have a Copilot service and a license. In this context, it could be Copilot for Microsoft 365. We maybe have plugins that fetch data from external sources or manipulate that. And then we have Microsoft's data store from Microsoft Graph that knows everything about our employees, our data, our emails, our connections, our triggers. And then we can introduce custom data on top of this. So typically when you're using a Copilot capability, it utilizes a large language model, but it relates to plugins and graph and custom data and a nice interface. The main Copilots, and there's quite a bit of Copilot services, I feel every week we are getting a new one. The main characters really are Copilot for Microsoft 365. Everybody knows that. Power Platform Copilot is a little bit more split in that it has sub capabilities. GitHub obviously has a bunch of Copilot capabilities for generating code and managing code. And then we have a Copilot for security, Copilot for Power BI, and Microsoft Fabric, and so on. But Power Platform Copilot is fairly closely aligned with Copilot for Microsoft 365. And why do I love generative AI? Here's a real world example from a couple of months ago. We were working on a Power Platform deployment for a customer. And in order to get that running, we needed something running in Azure as well that was supporting that Power Platform capability. And we hit the limit on the number of open files in Azure. And we couldn't figure out how to raise the ceiling of those open files. There was nothing in the documentation. Finally, we found a discussion board, and Microsoft support engineer said, yes, if you have this problem, you need to run this bit of code with a special parameter ulimit, no file 65535, so meaning 64 kilobytes. I felt, well, that's an oddly esoteric number. Why is it 64 kilobytes? Why is it not something else? It still wouldn't work. A day later, that same support engineer said, yes, we wanted to clarify. The solution we proposed was made with ChatGPT, and it hallucinated that solution. It doesn't really exist. And we are already there, that we are going to Gen AI for solutions. And sometimes we are picking up those solutions at face value. We don't really know if it's true. And for me, this feels like in the 1990s when cars began to have built-in GPS navigators. You would just put in the address and then you follow it and hope to get there. Now we are sort of in the same reality that we put in a question and hope to get an answer. Well, this looks valid. Let's go with this. We don't bother checking the solution. If it takes us 5 seconds to get the results, the value of that result might be 5 seconds of our time in the future. Quick example, another Power Platform implementation. We are using Dataverse quite often, but sometimes we have external data in a different database. This was an Azure SQL database, and we needed to design a quick table for some historical data for reporting in Power BI and also in Power Apps. And I know how to do SQL, but I don't really enjoy doing SQL. So I went to my local model, and that was utilizing the capabilities from GitHub. And I did ask, can you just create the SQL create statement that creates a table? I need this sort of data. And it gives me a fairly fine working syntax. I just copy this and paste this to wherever and create the table, document this. It's done. It takes me about 2 minutes to do this. If I did this manually, it might be an hour. So I may be saving 58 minutes in there. That's productivity for me. But once this was up and running, somebody came back to me and said, well, hey, Jussi, we also need a logic that when we add a new row in that table, we need a logic that triggers another value inserted in that row that combines the expiration date, the UDX value, and a random number. So that is sort of our verification method. Can you do the trigger for us, please? And I was like, well, it's been a couple of years since I did trigger, so let's see. I went back to the original chat. It has the memory of everything I've built up until that point. And I said, well, add a trigger, do this. 5 seconds later, I have a working trigger. I need to test this, obviously, but this takes another 2 minutes. I maybe saved 2 or 3 hours figuring out the syntax and testing, oh, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. Obviously, I need to understand what I'm getting here, but I don't have to spend cognitive capabilities to get to this point that I can actually try things out. So briefly on large and small language models, just to sort of make you understand and internalize that from OpenAI, we have the main prominent models, GPT 3.5 Turbo and GPT-4. Copilots utilize these two. And then Azure OpenAI is capable of offering those, and you can also build your own through Azure AI Studio, which is a capability in Azure. But in addition, we have other large and small language models. Meta, for example, has released Llama 3, which is super capable, as well as Code Llama, which allows you to generate code, including code for Power Platform. Microsoft has small language models in addition, Phi 2 and Phi 3, super capable for specific tasks, but lightweight, so that you can run these without needing a lot of hardware or without needing a lot of logic. And then there are others, a couple of here, the Wizard LM2, super capable, DBRX from Databricks, seems to be on par to GPT 3.5 Turbo, even GPT-4. You can combine these. So you can have multiple large and small language models in your solutions, and you can tackle data between the models. You don't just have to resort to the singular model that you're perhaps given. So now that we understand Gen AI, let's have a look at what it means in Power Platform. So obviously, Copilot in Power Automate and Copilot in Power Apps help the makers to become more productive. For Power Automate, create an automation, create a flow for me, and let me improve and iterate. Be my sideline, my sidekick here to build this for me a little bit faster. A bit like when I did SQL, I did something. This is a bit more polished approach. Copilot in Power Apps describe to create something for the application, and Copilot in Dataverse create columns, create data in Dataverse. Obviously, I could do that manually, or I could use an external capability like GitHub for that, but I can also use Copilot in Dataverse. For existing apps, I can expand and infuse generative AI to Power Apps using the Copilot control, or I can simply use Copilot to do it semi-manually. And I can also use AI Builder to connect to these external larger language models that I just showed. So I'm not just tied in to those models that the Copilot service is offering me. I can also pick and choose other models. And there's hundreds of models to choose from. Depending on the use case, you select the best model for that given use case. For faster automation with Power Automate, obviously creating the skeleton of the flow with Copilot, that's something everybody should be using nowadays. But also what I can do is I can also infuse AI Builder in here. I can bring my custom models in here, and I can connect this with Copilot Studio for additional logic. So it's really up to me to first understand the difference between Copilot services and the generative AI capabilities. And Copilot Services is one incarnation of those large language models with a predefined set of capabilities. And if I want to move forward from there, I am able to select additional models. And it's up to me to figure out what models and how do I want to use them. Copilot Studio, formerly Power Virtual Agents, allows me to create my custom copilots to coexist with other existing copilots. And I can then publish these on Teams, on chatbots, on a web page, or through email, or what have you. But I can also use Copilot Studio to create plugins, meaning let's retrieve custom data and let's expose that custom data through a custom Copilot. And I could then augment this with additional large language models. Or I could get custom data, run that through a specific small language model, which is super fast and cost efficient, and use that for grounding the data for future makers that are building solutions in Power Apps and Power Automate. Putting all of this together in Power Platform, all of the core capabilities include support for generative AI. AI Builder, which you can see here if you're not familiar with the icon. AI Builder, obviously, is the easy solution because it has the connectivity to Azure OpenAI. And through Azure OpenAI and Azure AI Studio, you can then get those additional capabilities. But if these seem to be hitting the ceiling for you, you can then expand to Azure a bit more, do logic with Azure Functions, logic apps, and also orchestrate how those queries, how those user prompts and questions are traveling between the different models, and how do you want to expose the results. Will you do the filtering and sanity checking in a Power App, or are you doing that already on the API side and the Power App is simply calling an external API without really understanding what it's planning on doing in there? So in closing, the options and considerations in the context of Power Platform and the different skill sets people have. We typically have the makers, we have developers, Microsoft likes to call them pro developers and architects. And then we have people on the business side who are perhaps less technical but have other traits that might be useful in here. For makers, the steps are infusing Power Apps and Power Automate with Gen AI, with the built-in capabilities. You don't need to worry about Azure AI Studio or third-party large language models or grounding or any of that stuff. You simply use the controls. You simply call an external endpoint to integrate logic from somewhere else. You can build your copilots. You can build simple plugins without any code and offer them for your colleagues and within the team. And you're essentially the front runners for testing these new intelligence capabilities. A year ago, we didn't have any of this. A year from now, we'll have 3 times the amount of these capabilities. So makers are really the people who are testing the boundaries already today. For pro developers, architects, they need to understand the model selection. They need to tweak, they need to build the advanced plugins, understanding beyond simple plugins to actually doing custom logic in those plugins, scalability, security, access control, all that. And also for integrating external data and grounding that data for any of the use cases. And it goes without saying, security, compliance, end-to-end design, all of that, like in a typical deployment project. Lastly, business needs to bring in the domain understanding. This is the sort of data we have. This is the sort of stuff we need. This is what we're expecting from you. We can source the data for you, but technically, the architects are probably building that connectivity. And business also needs to validate, are we getting the right results out? if we are infusing generative AI to a Power App or a Power Pages type of website, or to an automation for onboarding for new employees, they need to validate, they need to test, they need to ground and provide more input how it can become better. And for compliance, obviously, everyone's responsible for that, but business typically has the requirements for how are we compliant in terms of the data we're using to train the AI models that are then used for all sorts of solutions. Lastly, and super briefly, this is mostly for reference in understanding the other aspects in governing and securing the copilots and the generative AI. I tried to keep this as simple as possible, but there's quite a bit of moving parts, so that's why there's a lot of boxes. But typically, businesses are getting the data from Microsoft 365. So we need to know what do we have in SharePoint and Teams and Exchange. And for that, we have a couple of different capabilities, some from Microsoft Purview for doing data loss prevention, information protection, running reports to understand what do we have. And then we need to understand the permissions, because the copilots rely on Entra ID based permissions. So if everybody has the permission to see something they shouldn't be seeing, then everybody has the capability to query for that data through generative AI, perhaps through a Power App. And whatever data we use to train our Gen AI solutions, that data typically travels to our devices, the phones, the iPads, the laptops, the workstations, the servers, also the external applications. So we need to manage everything that we use to connect with those fancy and great solutions. If you're unsure where you stand today, have a look at the security exposure management, a relatively new capability that gives you a 360 overview of everything. What do you have? Where do you have it? How are you exposing that? And if you want to dive deeper, have a look at the SIS benchmarks for Microsoft 365 and Azure. In closing, in 1985, I recall, Arnold Schwarzenegger was starring in a movie called Commando. I was 8 years old, so my parents wouldn't allow me to watch this movie. But later, at the ripe age of 10, I was able to see a copy of a VHS videotape of this movie. I still vividly recall that. It was a great movie, perhaps not today that great, but at the time it was great. And the tagline for the movie was somewhere, somehow, someone's going to pay. And I think this applies to Power Platform fairly well, in good and in bad. You need to understand the licensing. With Gen AI, the licensing is not that crucial. But at the same time, you need to understand that when you use copilots, when you use Gen AI, you need to understand where the data is, who has access to that one, how does it scale, what are the elements, both in terms of technical and business related elements to that solution. And with this, thank you for your time. I hope it's been an eye-opening and informative session from me and Jasmo. Did we have any questions?
Thank you, Jussi. We have actually quite a bit of questions, which is always
Good.
great. But before going there, I must say that maybe in my presentation I was presenting that you need to have this kind of skills, and I was maybe giving an idea that you need to have somebody to have this expertise. Maybe that's not true. Maybe you need to have something that can help you with certain kind of expertise in following years. But yeah, we have had plenty of questions. First question was from Martti, and he was asking about Power Pages, when you should or shouldn't use them. I think my experience of that topic is that Power Pages use case is good when the situation is right. But those situations are rare. I think those are mostly related to Dynamics things. But when you have data in Dataverse and it's easy easy access for your customers. Maybe in that case, Power Pages could be your technology. We are using it sometimes, but from Solita's perspective, as we do have a lot of like traditional developers in house, it's often more interesting to go with the traditional way. I don't know if Jussi wants to share something. No.
Yeah, for Power Pages, I would agree on that one that you definitely need a specific use case. I wouldn't use Power Pages as something that instead of building a normal website, let's do Power Pages. I don't see the value in there. There's just too much complexity, too many moving parts in there. But for Power Pages, I would say it aligns somewhere between an extranet and something else. I have an additional audience in here.
Yeah, that's always good. There was other question about the Dataverse and pricing. Does Microsoft pricing ruin the future of Dataverse? The truth is that Dataverse is the most expensive data capacity in Microsoft ecosystem, I guess. But in our experience, customers tend to have quite a bit of licenses already, which brings quite a bunch of capacity in Dataverse for them. And we haven't experienced those cases where you need actually buy extra capacity, just capacity. Obviously, it's really expensive, that extra capacity. And some cases you might need that, but from our perspective, we have been able to offload the data to somewhere, maybe to data platform or Azure SQL or something like that. So haven't had problems with that.
I sometimes have the discussion on what's the cost of additional capacity for Dataverse and why is it so expensive. But I would sort of reframe the whole thinking that Dataverse shouldn't be for all of the data, historical data, and hot and warm and cold data that you have. I would say if you already have SQL databases, if you already know how to operate relational databases or NoSQL databases, utilize those and use Dataverse where the strength of that platform can be extracted. So same for us. We haven't really had a need to expand the capacity too often. It's actually quite rare, but we frequently have the discussion on what do we do if this happens, and then we need to make a little bit of planning with the cost versus complexity on should we offload someplace else or should we expand Dataverse.
You were referring to Nordic study. Sorry. There was question if it included healthcare organizations, the data. Do you know?
That's a great question. Next question. No, but I can have a look. I can also share the link in the chat for the study. So if you want to have a look at that yourself. I'm opening the website. It's in Danish. So if somebody's more fluent with Danish, I only have Moominsvenska myself, so this fails me. But have a look at the study. I can't say tell by heart if it includes that specific industry as well.
Okay, then question to you, Jussi, about Copilot in Power Automate. What is its status currently, or how do you see near future? Is it making makers obsolete?
It's definitely not making makers obsolete. I would say that if you're not experienced with Power Automate, Copilot helps you massively in getting the basics in place. But if you are super experienced with Power Automate, you maybe started with Microsoft Flow all the way back in 2016, then Copilot is a bit like, well, I don't really need this because I already know what I'm planning on doing. It is getting better. So some of the future innovations that I'm expecting to see in Copilot in Power Automate will move it from this sort of 1.0 to more a 2.0. But if you ask me again in a year from now, I would say, yeah, it's definitely better, but also it's not the same thing anymore because the user interface remains the same, but what happens behind the scenes with the data grounding and the large language models and the capabilities of those, they are evolving each week right now, and we don't see that. So we only see the end interface, and we can say it's great or it's not great. But a year from now, it will be totally different, and we have to reevaluate that again. That's probably one of the challenge here, that I can tell it's great, and somebody else says, "Well, I tried that 4 months ago. It wasn't great." Yeah, but it's not the same thing anymore. So you sort of have to keep track of that, but you also have to demand that it will evolve, and hope also it evolves in a way that will help super experienced builders as well. For now, I feel it's more for makers who need the basic stuff done more quickly.
All right. Then there was a question about sustainability and AI models. We have learned that AI models use a lot of electricity, maybe water. Does Microsoft have some kind of, well, the question is there. What do you say?
Yeah, so Microsoft is fairly vocal that they will be carbon negative by 2030, and that's surprisingly close. But of course, when you say carbon negative, it doesn't mean that we don't use any energy. It simply means that they're offsetting or optimizing that energy consumption. For me, what I did personally, I installed solar panels in my house, and when I got the solar panels installed, I figured I can run the large language models at home. They are powered with solar energy, which is probably one of the cleaner options. So now that I'm delivering this talk today, I'm just checking the panel data. This was fully powered with solar energy here in Helsinki. If you
Yeah.
if you ask me tomorrow when it's super cloudy or rainy, it might not be that anymore.
Cool. Actually, I must ask my own question. You mentioned so many times your local language models that you are running nowadays. What is your relation towards like ChatGPT or running local models?
Yeah, good question. And this is probably a topic I could talk about for 2 days in a row. But just to sort of condense that, those learnings and experiences that I've had in the past 18 months or so, you can run super performant models locally, and they will become indispensable tools for becoming more productive. But if you want to offer something for your customers, then typically you don't want to run those locally. You want to run those in the cloud. And then you have more abilities, but you have a different type of cost model as well. So what I do is I have about 20 different models that I run at home, and I'm testing and tweaking to try to understand where this is headed so that I can anticipate a little bit better how Gen AI will help me 3 months, 6 months, 12 months from now, because often what you see in Copilot, that might be something that was already a hot thing 6 months ago. And I want to be ahead of that curve to better understand how to get become more productive with Power Platform.
Okay. Local models are definitely interesting from my point of view as well. But now, final question. We are a little bit over time, but not all has left yet. So, final question. Mart is asking, what is the best way to convert your skill set from maker to professional dev or architect? Any advice? What topics to look for?
Great question. I would say you definitely need to pick up a nice programming language to learn at least the basics. I wouldn't say that you have to live in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code for the rest of your life, but become less intimidated in creating something from scratch with VS Code or Visual Studio. Is it TypeScript? Is it C Sharp? Hard to say. Those two are probably a good viable candidate. I see a lot of people moving from makers to becoming more developer side with Node.js so that they can do JavaScript, which is fairly accessible. Start from scratch. Have a local language model running someplace in the cloud, perhaps. Build a small connector from your Power Apps to that one. And if you do that sort of manually and not just auto generate that, you learn a lot. And that skill set will carry you over in the next couple of years when we start integrating those language models to anything we have.
Yeah, but I want to just a short comment on that how we have seen it in software industry, that when you are experienced Power Platform, like professional Power Platform maker or developer or whatever, the more senior or more experienced you are, the more your skill set goes outside of Power Platform. Nobody is super like deep only to Power Platform. It doesn't like help you solve all the cases that comes to you, and architecture and so on and so forth. But hey, thank you, Jussi. Thank you, everybody watching. Hopefully that was well spent time. If it wasn't, I'm very sorry, but hopefully it was. And to the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.